The following is a conversation. It has the features of any conversation, such as imperfectly expressed thoughts, ill-considered opinions, and the notions of several sleep-deprived brains. Try not to get your stethoscope in a twist about it.
I need some good news. People love bad news. At least they seem to like to pass it on to each other. Hence the 24-hour news cycle when you're pregnant and everybody tells you their horror stories instead of like all the wonderful things. So tell me some good news.
We did that last week, didn't we?
A little bit.
Oh, so sorry.
A little bit. So I don't know. Tell me some good news from your life.
My super anxious cat is doing really well.
Oh, good.
And
what do you mean? What was the trouble?
Oh, well, she's just always like hides and stuff, and she's starting to come out more. And I moved in with Faith at the beginning of the year, and she and Faith are
so
friends.
She was a little unsettled for a while.
Yeah, Antone.
Okay, there's so many faiths.
There's so many faiths.
Yeah.
But yeah, she's doing really well, and yeah, I see her face more often.
Oh,
she's the best. I will send you a picture.
I would, yeah.
There's a cat tax.
Of course you are.
Of course you will. That's what I want. Anybody else have any good news that you want to pass along?
I discovered the bookshop in town, Sidekick, does like wine trivia nights, and I went to that yesterday, and my friends and I got pretty much every single question wrong, but it was a lovely time, and it was very fun to connect and just do something not at all school related.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was super fun. Would recommend. Okay. It was spooky themed yesterday, so we got to do like horror books. It was very fun.
Nice. Jeff?
I mean, life's just good. I'm not gonna lie.
Okay.
I'm having a good time being alive.
I love that.
Yeah.
I suppose I should share some good news.
Yeah.
I hadn't really
What you got, Dave?
thought much about this. Okay. I have a wonderful family.
There you go.
They make me happy.
Love is all you
all
need.
the time.
I'm gonna be a little critical because I love you. You ready? The concept of news is meant for something that is new.
Life is good.
Well, they
is
sucked.
Your life
they sucked not long ago, but now they're
newly
great.
good.
Yeah, I'm glad that your family has improved, Dave.
My family, they hid under the bed. They were very anxious. And just lately, they've been coming out to see me, letting me scratch behind their ears. Yeah.
Are we going to get pictures of them later, too?
Yeah. Absolutely.
I guess my news is that my family is visiting for fall break.
There you go.
Great.
I'm rather fond of them.
Your family lives elsewhere in the Northeast somewhere, right?
They do, yeah.
Yeah.
And it would be nice to have them here in the not Northeast, more midish, westish.
Sure. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And it's homecoming weekend.
It is.
Oh,
Yes.
Are we going to the parade this afternoon?
I'm going to take a nap this afternoon.
I didn't even know there was a parade.
And then we have a class.
You should bring your kid to the parade.
No.
Okay.
I don't like crowds.
Fair. If it wasn't for the fact that my daughter is in the parade and because she's in the high school band and all that kind of stuff, I probably wouldn't go.
You're burying the lead on that one. You should have started with. I would go support your daughter in the parade.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I'll go support your daughter in the parade.
It's fine.
What's her name? I'll yell it while the band's going by.
Her name is Coraline.
Go, Coraline.
Go, Coraline.
How many of these parades have you been to throughout your time in Iowa City?
Oh, I don't go to all of them.
No.
Does she have to do like a winter parade? Those are the worst. The
I don't
instrument
know.
just freezes to your face. It's miserable.
Yeah.
What does she play?
She plays the euphonium.
Oh,
nice.
In the band, in the marching band. She plays the trombone in the jazz band. And she plays the euphonium in the wind ensemble.
This Coraline sounds about as cool as they come.
She is pretty cool.
Well done, Coraline.
She is pretty cool. I'll let her know that we said that on a national.
She'll be getting so many followers
podcast.
now.
Yeah,
Do you want to put her ad up?
Yeah.
The Coraline fan page.
Meandering in the margins of medicine, it's the Shortcoat Podcast.
Weird news,
fresh views,
helpful clues, and interviews.
By students, for students.
Subscribe to our weekly show at theshortcoat.com.
Welcome back to the Shortcoat Podcast. It's the show that gives you an inside look at medical school from the students drinking from that fire hose to production of the University of Iowa Carver College of Medicine. I'm Dave Etler. Good news, Shortcoats. I have with me today in the SCP studio some positively lovely people. Her mere existence led the nations of the world to declare an end to all conflict. It's M4 Mallory Kalish.
I'm an M3, but thank you very much.
God damn it.
20 minutes. I feel like an unfair
remember how I forgot to print out the show.
I'm really glad that you made that resolution that was like no more edits. We're just gonna go raw.
Oh, that went right out the window. His optimism is the reason we will soon have a colony on Jupiter. It's M2 Jeff Goddard.
It sounds accurate. Yeah.
She's so nice that D. Antwoord's Ninja met her and now writes children's books. It's M2 Olivia Jenks.
Dang, I'll take it.
I mean,
these are high
that guy's
praises.
a crazy person, so
He's writing wholesome kids books.
Kids books now.
Oh, because of me.
Because of you.
Yeah, all me. Sure.
Very nice. What did you say? What did you say to him?
I'd be nicer, obviously.
It worked.
There you go.
That's all it took.
He was like, "You are right. I would be. I don't know. It's South African accent." Yeah, I just wanted to, I felt in planning for the show and thinking about the show this week, we talk an awful lot about the problems in medicine and the problems in healthcare and the problems in society that tie into the problems in healthcare. I want to talk about positive things this week.
Do let's.
And, I admit it's a challenge. But I'm up for it. Just this past week, this is sort of a good news, bad news kind of situation, right? Just this past week, Politico reported that New York City is experiencing a big rise in tuberculosis cases, an increase of 20% from last year.
I'm sorry, you said this is supposed to be a good news
Well, we're getting there.
Okay.
It's driven by, I'm just giving the stakes, like why this is good news.
You said this is good news, and then you said tuberculosis on the rise.
Yeah.
That's in New York, and Dave lives in the Midwest, so there's news here.
It is driven by an influx of immigrants from parts of the world where TB is more prevalent, as well as a long and steady decrease in funding for public health in New York. But New York City isn't the only U.S. city that sees spikes in TB. Do a Google News search for TB, and you'll see lots of very recent articles. Plus, of course, TB is a worldwide problem.
It's the number one cause of death in infectious diseases on the planet, and has forever been so.
Yeah.
Like on occasion it might be bumped out by the latest pandemic, whatever that might be, over the course of human history.
Yeah.
But for the vast majority of the years that humanity has been on this planet, it has been TB that has killed the most of us.
Yes.
As far as infectious disease goes.
It's so common we don't even really see it anymore in the Western world. We basically are just like, la 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 la. But here's John Green of the famous Vlogbrothers YouTube channel speaking at the UN in September.
Famously Hank Green's brother.
Yes.
That's what he's most
Off-brand
known for. Yeah.
Hank Green.
Off-brand Hank Green, yeah.
We have had a disease that is curable for 75 years that continues to kill 1.6 million people. And maybe it was possible to say in the 19th century that death from tuberculosis was caused by a bacterium called M. tuberculosis, but we can really no longer say that. Today we have to accept the reality that since we know how to kill that bacteria, we know how to cure this disease. Today we have to accept the reality that death from tuberculosis is caused by human-built systems, by human choice. We have chosen the world that we share today, and we can choose a better world. We are currently choosing a world where 1.6 million people die of tuberculosis, and I believe that with your help together, working over the next decade, we will choose a world where no one dies of tuberculosis. Thank you.
So one of the problems he's highlighting, I think, is that Johnson & Johnson has held the patent for bedaquiline, a frontline treatment for TB. And, these guys, John and his brother Hank, Doctors Without Borders, Partners in Health, have all been in recent years drawing attention to Johnson & Johnson's reluctance to make it more available. And it seems kind of like the sustained pressure has put some cracks in that wall. Isn't that right?
Yeah, so Hank and John Green have been on YouTube, writing books, doing things out in the community for the last 2 decades, and have gathered a bit of a following. They call themselves Nerdfighteria. Yeah. And they were like, hey, we should probably talk to Johnson & Johnson about this. And so they did. They called, they posted tweets, they put it all over social media, and they put a lot of pressure on them. And lo and behold, instead of evergreening the patent on bedaquiline,
which they were entitled to do this July.
Yeah, right. Yeah, entitled is a strong word, but they certainly had the
legally allowed
the legal opportunity to re-up this patent. They did not do so as of a few days ago that I know of, which was a surprise, but not a bad one. Like, we were all pleasantly surprised, but very happy about the fact that Johnson & Johnson listened.
Yeah. So it means that generic drug manufacturers can now make it without worrying about being sued, as long as they're making high quality products, is my understanding.
Yeah,
so they still have the patent. They will just not be enforcing it unless people start making shitty copies of bedaquiline.
And historically, this means that prices are going to plummet. Which, when we're talking about a drug that is used specifically for multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, this is going to mean probably thousands, tens of thousands of lives from this one decision.
Yeah.
It's entirely possible that we could be talking about hundreds of thousands of lives, but it really depends on how far we can go building off of this momentum. Fun fact. Fun is a strong word. Tuberculosis, specifically tuberculosis in patients with HIV, is the number one cause of death in South Africa, where I spent my summer. And it's so common that, nobody wears masks in the hospital. It's like, yeah, they probably do. But those are the two tests that we always do, is HIV and TB, because odds are, I don't want to cast aspersions on Johnson & Johnson. The announcement does come after the company announced in July that it would supply bedaquiline at half price to the Global Drug Facility, which is great. That's the Global Drug Facility was established by the Stop TB Partnership as well as others. But a lot of people said that really wasn't good enough.
Not enough.
But like we said, they did step up to the plate. They did say that they were going to make this very positive step. Good for them.
Yeah. I think it also kind of underlies too the importance of advocacy and speaking out. And yes, John Green and Hank Green have amazing followers, and it's amazing those people stepped up and put pressure on Johnson & Johnson. But I think as medical students and listeners, I think there's ways to think about ways that we can make a difference too, even if we're not world leading experts in tuberculosis or other things.
Yep.
I think if somebody had asked me 5 years ago who I thought would be a world-leading expert in tuberculosis in 2023, I would not have put the novelist John Green on my top 5. But here we are.
Yeah.
Here we are.
That said, I think the value of this story... So I might be a John Green fan. Sorry, everybody out there.
We already know. You like the Green Brothers. We all like the Green Brothers. Who wouldn't like them?
I don't think anyone can dislike them, to be honest.
Green Brothers. Poo.
He's written this Anthropocene Reviewed, and he's made different statements on basically just talking about different aspects of life in the Anthropocene, which is the area of existence that humans have been in, right?
Yeah.
One of the things he talks about is despair, and how despair is easy. It's an easy emotion because it's just everything is bad, right? And it takes a little bit of complexity to accept that there's hope to be had. That hope, which is a hard emotion, is warranted, but it is nuanced. And I think that this is a wonderful case in point to that Johnson & Johnson was doing this thing that arguably was the reason why people were dying, right? Not nefarious, not like they're going out and hurting people. They feel like they can justify what they've done, right? Yeah. But at the same time, people are getting hurt from it. With a little bit of pressure and a little bit of community, we say, hey, we can do better. And Johnson & Johnson says, okay, let's do better. And I think that they should be lauded for that.
Yeah.
Because the only way that we're going to continue to see progress is to continue to have hope, is to say, look at the good steps that we're taking and praise those that are taking those steps.
I think the good thing about understanding the motives, the true motives of anybody is that it allows us to see where we need to focus our attention in the future in a given situation. So yes, they've done a great thing. Yes, it was maybe not entirely driven by altruism, but they did it, and they did it because people focused their attention on them, and that is that's how you get things done, I guess, in any world.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm comfortable saying that I'm not as concerned about their motives as the fact that people are going to live because of this decision.
Yeah.
They can have the world's worst motives. If people are alive today because of this, that's a good thing, Yeah. As an optimist, I'm probably going to ascribe the absolute best motives to them because I do that to everybody anyway. But
I'm not an optimist, generally speaking. I'm not exactly a pessimist either. I guess what I like to do is to make sure that when I think about these things, I like to look at as many sides of the situation as possible, and because I want to understand what's going on. When something terrible happens or when somebody does something terrible, I also want to know, why did they do that thing? When somebody does something good, I want to know, why did they do that thing? I just think I don't know, for some reason it satisfies me to know the reasons for things rather than just what happened and whether it was good or bad.
Yeah.
There was another announcement by a multinational corporation, I'm not sure how to say this, Danaher, and its subsidiary Cepheid. Well, they promised that they will provide their test for multi-drug resistant TB at cost to the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, TB, and Malaria.
Can I clarify? So
by all means,
this was the test that they're referring to. This was specifically the one, the like cheaper of the two. There's another that tests for multi-drug resistance, I'm pretty sure.
Certainly, there's more than just the two, but this one is for resistant TB, and there is one that is, there's a specific term for it, but it's like XR, which is like extra resistant. Like it's multiple drugs that it's resistant to. And that one, which is the more expensive one, they have not lowered the price for.
Okay.
And so I think a natural reaction, a reasonable reaction would be like, well, what about those? And certainly we want them to continue to work on lowering that. That said,
it's a good start.
It is a good
Something's
start.
better than nothing.
Something's always better than nothing.
It's a phenomenal start to convince a company to essentially like a net zero on a product, right? That is a beautiful thing that we have worked toward, right? And I think that it will do a lot of good in the world to have that.
So I don't know if we're within reach of, I don't know if this brings us within reach of eradicating TB. I don't know if
I don't think so.
I don't think we're there.
What does that look like for you, Dave? What does it mean to be within reach of eradicating TB?
I don't know. I don't think we're going to eradicate it as an illness, but certainly we can treat people, anybody who needs it, who needs that treatment, we can treat them and they won't be so likely to die from TB.
Yeah. So you want to eradicate the mortality, recognizing
I would like to eradicate the whole thing. I'm not going to be stingy about my desires for eradication.
That's fair. Yeah.
But like it seems like that would be an impossible goal. I don't think that is a thing that can happen, is it?
I wonder, did somebody say that 100 years ago about smallpox?
Is smallpox truly eradicated?
Smallpox is in labs, but not.
We have lab specimens, which I would argue probably we shouldn't even have those. But the last case of smallpox was so the last natural case of smallpox was in 1978 in Somalia. Yeah. And then 1979, there was a lab accident and an individual had contracted. That is the last case in human history of somebody contracting smallpox.
I guess I know that there are certain characteristics of transmissible diseases that lend themselves better to eradication, and
like smallpox doesn't have an animal reservoir.
Yeah, if your only reservoir is humans, those are the diseases that we can get rid of. So polio.
So I guess I don't know enough about tuberculosis to know whether it's eradicatable in the extreme sense.
I mean, I don't even know, even if it was, which I'm not sure if it is, if that would even be within reach. Not to be pessimistic on our optimism episode, but like, a lot of the research and development for these drugs come from the West, and now that it's not the West, more developed countries.
Yeah, I think it's silly when we say the West, but Australia gets included.
And I think that fact that tuberculosis isn't a big issue here made it worse in a lot of other parts of the world. If you look at kind of the timeline of new tuberculosis drugs coming in the market from 20 years, from 1960 to 1980, there was tens or hundreds of new drugs, and there wasn't a new drug until 2011 after the 80s. So once it no longer became an issue here,
it was a problem, and it was a problem in the 80s because of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, which had been around in other countries, but suddenly it was our problem, and so tuberculosis also became our problem.
So once more research risk countries got rid of it, it kind of it made it worse for places that didn't have the resources that we do.
I will say, though, that was also the case with smallpox. The last case of smallpox in the United States, anybody want to hazard a guess?
No.
1949.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Decades before it had been eradicated in the rest of the world. So that is to say that if the world agrees to work on a problem together, it can be done. Guinea worm was a huge problem in the 70s and 80s, right? I think we're down to single digits contractions on the planet. And that's in large part due to our former president, Jimmy Carter, who has spent a good chunk of his life with his foundation trying to eradicate guinea worm. And they are almost there, literally single digits. polio has gone from being, about as common, that it was just like a summertime disease, like everybody just in the summertime you get polio, right? To there are a few dozen cases a year, and like we've slowed down a little bit because of the COVID pandemic, but we're right there at eliminating polio. That will likely happen in our lifetimes. Now, if we decide to switch gears and go to tuberculosis, I hope so, we can eradicate it. It's possible. Right? To my knowledge, tuberculosis doesn't have animal reservoirs.
A quick internet search says that there is bovine tuberculosis, but I don't know that those two types of tuberculosis can transmit from humans to animals. So, if the human tuberculosis can't be spread to any other species, then it is possible.
Shortcoats, we love to hear from you, no matter what it's about. So call us at 347-SHORT-CT with questions, shower thoughts, complaints about your situation, whatever you like. We'll talk about it on the show.
Do you want to know one of the big reasons? And this is going back to that hope is nuanced and complicated and despair is easy. One of the big reasons why tuberculosis isn't on everybody's mind. It's getting more back to people's mind. Thank you, John Green. But the reason why it hasn't been over the last 20 years?
Because it hasn't really been a problem for us.
We have been thinking about, at least there are people who have been thinking about infectious diseases around the world, and different ones pop up and make up, their blips. But the big one over the last 20 years has been malaria because the Gates Foundation exists. Again, not nefarious, but because they decided to focus on something and because they had a lot of money, guess where everybody else focused? They focused where the money was, which is reasonable. It's understandable. And frankly, addressing malaria is more cost effective. Addressing tuberculosis is much more expensive and takes far fewer resources to either prevent or treat malaria than it does to prevent or treat tuberculosis.
Why is that?
Just by nature of the drugs that we have for them, or by nature of removing the pathogen. Like you can't take a mom away, right? Like you can't remove entire people out of a village that have tuberculosis, latent tuberculosis that may or may not come back later. But you can start eliminating mosquitoes in a community, right? Or at least put up mosquito nets or whatever. So in that sense, malaria is just a little bit cheaper to address. The Gates Foundation starts addressing it and everybody says, let's focus on that one. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. It's just that has been the nature of where global infectious disease work has led us, especially nonprofit efforts. Now, research, that's a whole other thing, right? Because who's writing the grants? Often it's government. So that is certainly on us. I guess the reason why I bring that up at all is to say that this is, like John Green says, this is not a lack of decisions. Right? People are making decisions. People have chosen to do certain things. And in a lot of the cases, those things are not bad things. It's prioritizing the good versus the better versus the best. And tuberculosis is an issue where it might be better to focus on it over other things, right? But I like to think that there are people in the world that are genuinely trying to make the world a better place. They're just focusing on a different issue than TB.
Well, this all kind of ties into what I also wanted to talk about today, which was the story of the people who came up with using mRNA as a therapeutic, which I feel like has an interesting story to it, and one that for some reason I didn't realize until this week. And what happened this week was that they received the Nobel Prize for Medicine and Physiology. And so that's what got people talking about it again. Somehow I missed it a while back, but I want to tell the story today. It's about a Hungarian researcher named Katalin Karikó. She was a young doctoral student in Hungary in the 1970s when she first had the idea to use mRNA as a therapeutic technology. So most people listening to this podcast might have some idea of what mRNA is, but I'm going to go over it anyway because I felt like I learned more about it as a layperson this week than I had before. So messenger RNA, that's what mRNA stands for, is pretty much what it sounds like. It's a message or maybe a recipe from cellular DNA to ribosomes. And, you can think of ribosomes. I think of ribosomes as kind of the line cook, and the DNA is maybe the chef, right? So the DNA, the chef writes this recipe, gives it to the ribosomes. The ribosomes take that recipe and whip up, a meal of proteins that the body needs to function. And, this is the basis of how protein is manufactured in the body. It's basically how we are what we are, right? Does that make sense? Is that, from a layperson's perspective, does that make sense? So Karikó's vision was that someday we would be able to synthesize mRNA that would instruct cells to make therapeutic proteins. But in the early 70s, when she first thought of this, scientists didn't really know how to make RNA. Later, when she did her postdoc at Temple University in the late 70s, they figured it out, but there was a problem. Anybody know what the problem is?
Money?
No.
You got to get it into the cell and have it not break down?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. So, so in 1989, Karikó joined the University of Pennsylvania to continue her mRNA research. She was an adjunct professor at the time. She was on track to be a tenured full professor. But pretty soon, people's interest in mRNA began to subside. And the reason was mRNA was very unstable. You put it into mice and it pretty much falls apart immediately.
One might say by design, right? Like it is intentional that we have a molecule that is temporary in our body because we don't want it sending these messages too much, right? We don't want too many proteins being made that are of a specific type.
Right.
And the other problem is that these pieces, once they fell apart, they became interesting to the immune system and led to a dangerous immune reaction. Mice got really sick. They would, their hair would fall out and they would stop eating and they would basically look like shit.
Dumping on the mice.
I mean, it's not their fault. Like I look like shit. At least twice a day. I
think mice are an interesting model. Like you give them like you look at them cross-eyed and they just get cancer. I don't understand. It's a weird model for human health, but okay.
But nobody could, they couldn't figure out how this could be, how this situation could be, changed. And so funding disappeared. Without support from industry and funding bodies and getting grants, papers, experiments approved, it was basically a constant struggle. And in 1995, after repeated grant rejections, UPenn demoted her and told her she'd have to pay to keep using the lab.
Ugh. Oof.
So in looking at the history of this situation, I'm not sure exactly where this fits in, but I think that she stayed at Penn because she was diagnosed with cancer and her husband was having visa issues.
Can we just say cancer?
Yeah, I'm down with that.
Tuberculosis and cancer.
Yeah. She basically had to stay at UPenn, which, that might be a good thing because in 1997, she met Drew Weissman, an immunologist who was trying to use DNA to make a vaccine and who shared her curiosity about mRNA. So their first experiments were very discouraging. Still, mice got sick. They couldn't figure out why. I mean, mRNA is made by the body. Why are they getting sick when they put it in the body? But they kept tinkering with the molecular structure, and they had a breakthrough when they when they realized after basically what they did is they kept substituting out mRNA base pairs to see what happened to the immune response, and they realized that almost any change they made a smaller immune response. So something was going on there. It turns out that the body has a way around this problem. It adds one molecule called pseudouridine to mRNA. So by adding pseudouridine, they produced RNA that was more stable and it did not set off the body's immune system. They could use mRNA as a safe, programmable therapeutic technology. So everybody celebrated. Everybody went, yay, we can use mRNA, right?
This was what, in the 90s?
This is the 90s, yeah.
Okay. So I'm guessing there's more to this.
No. Everybody was like, yawn. UPenn still did not support their work. Most journals wouldn't publish it. They couldn't afford their lab fees, so Karikó finally was able to leave Penn in 1998. Weissman stayed on at Penn, but struggled to convince others of mRNA's potential. People just didn't get it. People didn't understand, I guess, what we know now. Like, hindsight is 2020, and I'm like, why the hell didn't you people get this? I mean, it seems like a very clear thing that if you can create whatever protein you want,
And I mean, it's done by viruses and other things that naturally infect humans, right? We weren't the first people to think about using.
Yeah. But still, the viruses made people sick with their...
Right, but viruses can use RNA to hide, to make the proteins and things that they want. So it makes sense that we could do that, and use that for good.
Yeah. Well, it took them a while.
Shortcoats, if you're enjoying our conversation today, I'd be grateful if you'd let people know by posting a story on Instagram or Facebook or tweeting about us. And don't forget to tag us in your post.
Thank you.
But in 2013, Karikó met the founder of German biotech firm BioNTech, which at this point should be a little familiar to us.
That one sounds familiar.
And he recognized the value of modified mRNA. BioNTech offered her a job, and she jumped at it. And in 2018, another familiar name, Pfizer, joined with BioNTech on a partnership to make a flu vaccine using mRNA. And then what happened soon after that? Does anybody remember? Does anybody remember what happened after that?
Dave, you think my brain is working well right now?
2019, COVID-19 emerged.
I mean,
never heard of that.
Never heard of that.
Within how many weeks from discovering this new virus was it sequenced and shared with the world?
Not long.
In like 2 weeks?
Yeah, it was very
impressive.
fast, as I recall.
It was really impressive.
And when you have the entire genome of a virus, yeah, I can see how one might think, if I could program a protein using this information, that could go to our benefit.
And BioNTech CEO realized that they had this answer, that based on what emerged about the novel coronavirus, the target protein that they decided to force cells to make was the infamous spike protein on the outer surface of the virus, the protein that is the mechanism that coronaviruses use to inject their viral payload into DNA, making them sick. Almost immediately, they were able to identify this way for them to program cells to create the spike protein, to cause an immune response, to prime the immune system to recognize COVID and the novel coronavirus, which would block the virus from using the spike, and cells wouldn't be infected as readily.
I have to say, the novelty has worn off.
It's a little less novel these days. And so their work, along with Operation Warp Speed, which is the name of the funding effort that the Trump administration created or promulgated or whatever they did, led to massive clinical trials, right? I think the number I read was 40,000 people enrolled in this clinical trial, which showed the vaccine was, I think, surprisingly effective. I don't know much about vaccines in general and how effective they are.
Nobody was anything less than floored.
No, it was like 96% in the clinical trials and like 90% in the real world, ultimately preventing severe disease.
Yeah, which is like insane. Miraculous.
Yeah.
You know, and talking about the first strand, it wasn't just severe disease, it was any disease, right?
Yeah.
Like it was miraculous how well this was working.
And I think that's when most of the rest of us who weren't, biomedical researchers and stuff started hearing about mRNA.
Yeah.
Right? The first mRNA vaccine was approved on an emergency basis for COVID-19, proving Karikó and Weissman's discoveries were revolutionary. And of course, Moderna's vaccine was also mRNA based. I'm not really sure what the story, how they got there as well, pretty much at the same time. And yeah, as I said at the start, just this past week, Karikó and Weissman received the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine, finally recognized for their work identifying and overcoming the barriers to safe mRNA therapeutics. Saved millions of lives from COVID-19. Countless more applications to come. I feel like I've read about cancer, genetic diseases, basically any disease where the body maybe is unable to make a protein, or that the course of the disease could be changed by the production of a protein, or maybe even a protein that's not properly being manufactured and could be properly manufactured with mRNA. All of those mRNA should be a great tool. I'm really looking forward to hearing more about this. I know it feels like it's poised to revolutionize medicine. And I'm just, the reason why I wanted to tell this story was like, this woman's a bad bitch.
Well, and this all started from her PhD.
Yeah. In the 1970s,
I think that's so cool.
45 years ago, I was 8 when she emigrated to the U.S., which I told you something. Talk about persistence.
Yeah.
Well, and it just goes to show that the work that we're doing as student researchers, as students, as people who are interested in science, this stuff matters.
Yeah.
And we are going to be the next generation that's coming up with these super cool, crazy ideas. And so don't undervalue yourself just because, you feel like you're just sitting in a lab, failing, because, 40 years later,
Yeah,
Nobel Prize, you know.
Every single person.
Every single person.
Right now, gonna get a Nobel Prize.
Congratulations now on your future Nobel Prizes.
Thank you.
We're proud of you.
Yes. I'm so proud of you. Yeah, as I said, I hadn't really heard about this story before. Had you guys heard about this woman?
No,
I had not.
I had not. I mean, also,
for some reason, I imagine Jeff did.
Yeah.
My undergraduate degree is in biotechnology.
Yeah.
My first semester in college, we were using mRNA technology in bacteria. This is not.
Yeah.
This is why it was very surprising to me that everybody was like so up in arms in 2020. I was like, we're talking about new. Like, I know this is the first time we've made a vaccine on it, but this technology is something that I was doing years ago.
Yeah.
You know, like.
I sometimes when I learned about this story, to me it's a good story, and it could be told better, I'm sure, than I just did.
I think you did a great job.
You did a great job.
But
you have a soothing baritone.
Yes.
I get by it. My voice gets me by in a lot of things.
Listen to it all day.
Got a voice for radio and a face too.
The number.
Oh no!
Sorry.
Thank you. So when they were like, we have a vaccine.
2020.
November 2020.
We have a
got my
vaccine,
jab.
and I was like, Yahoo! But a significant portion of the world was like, that was quick.
Interestingly enough, other models were not that far off.
Yeah.
But they used things like the adenovirus, ways to get the information into us that we felt were much more conventional.
Well, we were used to them.
Yeah, and so people felt more comfortable with them, even though they were ultimately less effective. They were something that we knew. And let's be honest, when you're in the middle of a pandemic, new things are scary.
Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah. I was thinking that it would have been interesting to see how people would reacted if this was the story that was told.
Rather than like, oh, this was approved in less than a year. The whole clinical trials were just like rushed through with emergency.
People really dig stories. Number one, that's one of the reasons I think that it could have been effective. But also, like, I think we can all sort of relate to somebody struggling to make something happen.
Yeah.
And
people not believing in them.
Believing in them and all this kind of stuff. And then in the end, it turns out to be true. I mean, that's the basis for like 50% of movies. If not more. I mean, And
to be fair, that's the basis for a vast majority of medical breakthroughs. They're not. This is a conversation that we've had before on this podcast, and we'll probably have again. But mavericks in all fields of science are often people that should not be listened to, Andrew Wakefield, and often people that should be listened to.
I think that's what makes it so hard.
It's exactly what makes it hard, because when you have a novel idea, it will fundamentally change everything if it's right.
Yeah.
And if it's wrong, you should not be listened to.
Yeah.
But how do you determine that? You can look at the data, but like sometimes it's kind of hard to make sense of it. Sometimes it's kind of hard to see the long-term picture. Like nobody in the 1970s were thinking this is going to be how we're going to stop the next pandemic. There was no way that they could conceptualize that yet. And yet, here we are,
I don't know. It seems obvious to me. I mean, if I
8-year-old Dave would have just walked into our lab like, this is it.
Like, I'm in charge of NIH. Here's some money. I love you.
But I mean, probably like when she was going through all these difficulties with funding and and not being able to get research grants and all these things, like people probably thought that she was on the other side of that spectrum, right? They thought that she was obsessed or crazy or like delusional in some way. Yeah. And now that we have time and perspective, we can like see the genius that it was. But I just can't imagine that she just kept the persistence for that is amazing, especially not being able to get research dollars. Like it's so hard to do research without government backing.
And the other interesting thing about this story is that ultimately it wasn't government backing. It was big pharma.
Yeah.
That, according to the story anyway, seems to have, come to her and our aid. Yeah, there was Operation Warp Speed, which certainly provided, I guess, the sort of last mile funding that was necessary to get it actually into people's arms in a timely fashion. But without, BioNTech being like, hey, this is interesting to us, let's pursue this, nobody else was going to do it.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of an interesting twist on the story too. We vilify big pharma, but turns out that they have a useful function.
As I said last week, and I will die on this hill, sorry everybody, there just really aren't that many villains. Everybody wants a villain, but people are nuanced, organizations are nuanced. There's good and bad in all of us.
True villains are hard to come by. true gods are also hard to come by.
As much as I think that we can rightly challenge the effectiveness or the success of any administration during the pandemic, at any point in the pandemic, Warp Speed worked.
Yeah.
It was the public-private partnership that brought us those vaccines, in the timely fashion that it did, saved lives, right?
And I will be, personally, I just remember the excitement that I felt, after a year of,
bad news after bad news
hiding,
right.
like watching. I remember sitting in my office in March of that year with do you remember they had I think it was a John Hopkins map.
Yes.
Do you remember that map with all the big red circles that kept getting larger and larger? Red. And I remember Kate coming into my office and looking at it and going, "Holy shit, Dave, what are you doing?" Because I just looked like, the world was ending based on that map. And then when this vaccine came out, I remember being transported with elation. That's the
it's
only
just
way
so relieving.
Yeah.
To know that that there is an end and that it doesn't, it's not going to fizzle out because so many people died of it, that we're going to have a way to end it or at least temper it. Through
I mean,
medicine.
people were throwing elbows to get access to that vaccine. I remember calling every day being like, do you have it? Do you have it? Do you have it?
I mean, I'm not going to lie. I volunteered to get my vaccine.
Yeah.
If you volunteered a certain number of hours, they'd give you the vaccine.
I will say one of my biggest frustrations as somebody who is reasonably healthy, working in healthcare, worked in the hospital throughout the entire pandemic, but I've always been kind of globally oriented just by nature of having family and friends around the globe. I was pretty frustrated through the early months with the level of prioritization or deprioritization, right? So the idea that this 80-something-year-old dean at the College of Medicine at Stanford gets the vaccine early. He's working at home. He's not around patients. He's not going to get sick. Yeah. He should have been very low as opposed to, the 30-something-year-old nurse who is taking care of patients that have COVID. Yeah. She probably should have been prioritized, right?
Well, and even when we talk about that too, these vaccines required, a pretty high level of care, I guess, so that they wouldn't break down. They needed to be, in negative 30 degrees Celsius.
That's true. It's hard to remember that the first vaccines were super delicate.
Right. Yeah. And so in order to have those kinds of machines, you have to, you can't be a rural hospitals don't have those kinds of refrigerators and that kind of thing. And I think ultimately, the more rural locations and, lower resourced areas in the U.S., probably should have been prioritized more than they were, just because of the sheer amount of people, that are going to end up at those hospitals. I mean, obviously, we do need to get the vaccines to more populous areas and areas that do have resources. But yeah, I think that was one area that I felt a little conflicted on.
I got the Johnson & Johnson one, and it was a deliberate choice. And it wasn't because I had any kind of concern with the mRNA technology. I was thrilled with it. Like I said, biotech background. I got it specifically because I wanted to be a part of the community that was creating some kind of confidence in it, because that was the vaccine that had the greatest opportunity. At least initially, we thought that's the one that's going to be able to get to the rural poor. That's the one that's going to be able to get to places that don't have access to hospitals, because it didn't need to be at negative 30 degrees.
Right.
And it turned out that one was particularly risky for people of menstruating ages. I mean, every one of them has something, right? But that one, there was the deep vein thromboses that they found in Germany, I believe. And so that ended up not being the safest vaccine for everybody, right? It's still a reasonable vaccine if you're over a certain age, but it ended up also being a little bit less effective, especially as the virus continued to mutate. But that said, at the beginning, when it first came out, I was all for it because of that reason, because this is the real chance of helping the people that need it most, the people that can't make it to the fancy centers that can get to negative 30 degrees Celsius or whatever.
So we had a show with Paul Offit, vaccine guru, researcher, public science educator, on the show recently.
He was a big influence on how I was looking at all of these vaccines throughout the pandemic, if I'm honest.
So our episode on YouTube continues to draw comments, not all of them positive. I would say 50-50 are like from angry anti-vax people.
Oof.
And the other 50 are from people who are like, oh, I love Paul Offit.
I think it should be noted that Paul was very skeptical of warp speed early on in the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I think rightfully so, because we had never seen a vaccine that had skipped several steps of the full FDA process, which was the point of the emergency use authorization. You're skipping several steps here. Not all of them, but you are skipping some. And to do it in 6 months. And it just seemed like that you couldn't possibly make a good enough vaccine in that time frame. And then the data came out, and Paul changed his tune,
and I think that's the tenor of all of the negative comments on this video was, well, he said once that blah, 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 blah.
It's realistic to be scared about that. It's realistic to have those fears.
Yeah. I mean, he's a vaccinologist. He literally worked on the rotavirus vaccine. He's the reason that one of the vaccines that we give to children exists. He's looked at this data before. So he had prior beliefs that were rational, and then allowed the data to change those beliefs.
Right. And I think that seems to be the funny thing about the comments is that, he changed his mind.
Yeah.
He just changed it in a way that
they didn't like.
Yeah. And that they're still not willing to change their mind.
Yeah. I mean, I've had to change my mind several times on these vaccines, and including on the J&J one, right? Like I was so excited for that one to be the thing that we were going to get to Sub-Saharan Africa, that we were going to get to India, that we we're going to get to Latin America. And then it turns out it just didn't have the safety profile and it didn't have the effectiveness that we needed it to have. I was jumping up and down, extolling Moderna and Pfizer for their efforts to help people out around the world until India was going through their big wave in May 2021. And Moderna had the opportunity to release their patent and just let people, because it was already being manufactured in India, make their vaccines. And they said, no, we want to continue to make our billions of dollars. And then I was like, man, there's no true villain, but also like you're not exactly a hero right now. Right? And the US had this opportunity to say, hey, we're not going to enforce your patent. Sorry. But we didn't do that. We said, here's a drop in the bucket. Here's a few thousand vaccines, so we've all had to change our minds on this. And I think that frustrates a lot of people that turns out the world is nuanced. Like hope itself, science requires a lot of nuance.
I think that's why I would have liked to have heard this story sooner.
And science changes as we learn more and more and more,
I just it really sort of illustrates that but it also puts a human face on the whole thing rather than, as you said, oh, we have a vaccine and it's FDA approved and we rushed it through here for you. That's a harder story to sort of wrap your head around.
And I think you did the right thing. Like it's a beautiful idea to say, here is 50 years of somebody laboring and slaving and blood, sweat, and tears into the efforts of trying to perfect this technology. This isn't something some guy came up with last week. This is a lifelong labor of love in the science. It's a beautiful story.
Well, that's our show. Mallory, Jeff, Olivia, thanks for being on the show with me today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Dave.
And the good news is I'm remembering to thank you, Shortcoats, for making us part of your week. If you're new and you like what you heard today, follow the show wherever fine podcasts are available, like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. Today's show is produced by yours truly. The show is made possible by a generous donation by Carver College of Medicine student government and ongoing support from the Writing and Humanities program. Our music is by Dr. Vox and Catmosphere. I'm Dave Etler saying, don't let the bastards get you down. Talk to you in 1 week. Hi, Shortcoats. Look, life in medical education, life in America, life in the world is often difficult. And I often wish I could help. All I have is this podcast, but in my wildest dreams, you have the support you need to lead a life of your choosing. You deserve to be happy, healthy, and successful in whatever ways you define those words. So if you need support because you've experienced racism, discrimination, harassment, mental health crises, I want you to be able to get the help that you need. And so I'm going to put some links in the show notes to some resources that you can use. But the bottom line is that for what it's worth, I see you. I know you're out there. I wish I could do more. Maybe I can in ways that I don't understand yet or know about. But I see you, and I'm glad you're here, and other people are too.
The Short Coat Podcast is a proud member of the MedEd Media Network. Inspiration, information, and guidance on your journey to medical school and beyond at mededmedia.com.